So welcome to the round robin of the poster sessions. And we've got 2 of those posters, maybe even 3 here today. Yvette and Peter are 2 names I recognize from the list, and I'll have to go look at my program to make sure we don't miss anybody else. But with fewer people, that means you have more time to chat about your projects, which is great. So we'll start with Yvette to share what they're doing at her institution, and then have time for questions and comments, and then jump to Peter. The presentations have been recorded, so they will just give a brief summary of their recording, and then field questions and comments, and maybe throw out some prompts to invite discussion. We have 45 minutes, and it looks like we'll have probably about 3 different posters. So let's say 10 minutes each, and then if there's extra time, we can just make it a wild card. Sound good? All right.
Sounds good.
Yvette, I'm gonna hand the microphone over to you to get us started. Peter, I'm gonna make you the host until I come back, and then I'm gonna go start another session in another room.
Okay, a lot of responsibility. Thanks.
Yes.
Peter.
Hi,
So
Yvette.
I'm not sure if they ever received my video. I know I kept getting emails that they didn't receive it. So, but I do have it. I don't know if I need to share the screen or
Yeah, that's what I was going to do, Yvette. I was just going to, well, I was just going to share, a few screens of that, what I put in my poster session recording.
Yeah, I have the poster as a PDF file. I could just share that because the video I sent it, but I didn't see it up there, so I'm not sure if they ever received it. So I'm gonna try to share my screen. I don't think I have access to do that.
Let's see. I think, Yvette, you're a co-host now with me.
Oh, okay.
So if you scroll, like sort of put your pointer near the bottom of your picture, you might see a share screen. You see it? Okay, great.
Yes, it looks like I can share. So I'm thinking everybody can see it now.
Yes, looks good.
Okay. So I'm just gonna go briefly because I'm not sure how many people are here. And as people are getting on, I'll go ahead and get started. So my presentation today is on utilizing technology and UDL guidelines to provide equity in the classroom. My name is Yvette Onye, and I am an assistant professor, and I teach at Goodwin University in East Hartford, Connecticut. Basically, just a brief introduction. It is best to create an environment for students to be able to communicate, participate, explore information, and discuss their findings. And it's also important to make learners feel that they are part of the learning process. So I can just read briefly. According to CAS, the UDL guidelines are a tool and used in implementation of the Universal Design for Learning, a framework to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all people based on scientific insights into how humans learn. The UDL guidelines can be used by educators, curriculum developers, researchers, parents, and anyone else who wants to implement the UDL framework in a learning environment. So that's what I'm utilizing in the classroom right now. I have got the training completed. So now I am a teaching fellow as part of the Universal Design for Learning. It's a wonderful tool, and I'm sure quite a few of you are familiar with it. So the objective for this particular poster is to help increase learning in the classroom. I teach computer applications, and one of the goals in the course is to teach computer terms, hardware, software, and so forth. And to make it a little bit easier for students, it's best to get them involved. in the past, the lecture was just me talking at the screen. I mean, I know we're all familiar with that. You're standing up at the screen and you're doing all this talking and all this, showing all this stuff up on the screen. When I learned the UDL guidelines, I learned to add those particular guidelines. And the guidelines that I utilize are engagement, which is 7.2, 8.3, action and expression 5.1. The 7.2 guideline is to optimize relevance, value, and authenticity, which provides participation, exploration, and experimentation. Basically, if you look over here to the right, 7.2 is basically to have class participation. So have the students look up the terms instead of you standing up telling the student what the hardware and software is. Put up a term, have the students look up the terms. They can look it up on their computer, they can look it up on their cell phone, however they need to do it. And this can, what I'm talking about today basically can go across any academic platform. And then 5.1 is use multimedia for communication. And over here to the right, that's basically in class or an online discussion, or have physical objects instead of just talking again in front of the students, have them participate in the online discussion. And then 8.3 is foster collaboration and community. And that's basically over here to the right, learner interaction. Put students in groups, have them discuss among one another the different items that you're trying to, that they're trying to learn. What is that particular item? What is that tool among one another, and discuss openly. Then finally, I'm trying to keep it short, to the bottom right here, this is a little bit of data that I have observed before and after applying the UDL guidelines. So before applying the UDL guidelines for communication, participation, and research, the numbers were very low. There was very little communication, very little participation, and very little research. But after I applied the guidelines, the 7.2, 5.1, or 8.3, I mean, it basically went up 100%. And this was for an on-ground course. And actually, I was teaching that in 2020, on ground with a mask on. And then a synchronous course, I also did the same evaluation. And before, the communication, participation, and research was very low. But then after, it increased almost 100% fold. I got a thunderstorm right now, so hopefully nothing goes out. And then you will see it in a better way also in the chart below. So finally, the results. Applying the UDL guidelines and creating an environment to have students to come together to communicate, participate, and explore information, learners were pleased to understand the terminology and became interested to learn. Second, students were pleased to know that they learned something about what they have already been using. So they learned about the various components of the computer, a cell phone, tablet, iPad. Basically, a cell phone can do more than make a call and text. So just the fact that they learned those skills and how they learned it was so important. And then finally, students appreciated learning the terms in this format to support them when it was time for them to go purchase a computer, to use cloud storage, do research, complete assignments and projects, and utilize social media. So that is my poster project that I tried to put together for a brief moment, because I know it was only supposed to be about 10 minutes and I didn't want it to be longer than that. So that's what I have today. Does anyone have any questions?
Hi, Yvette, this is Peter. I have a quick question. Can you say a little bit more about CAST, C-A-S-T, the acronym you used there?
Yes, CAST is basically the, I would say they are the creator of universal design for learning. And I think they've been around for a very long time. And a lot of colleges are now starting to adopt this particular way of teaching. Um, so basically, like I said, in the actually adopted right from the CAS website, the UDL guidelines are a tool used in implementation for universal design for learning. It's a framework to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all people based on scientific insights into how humans learn. And there are a lot of guidelines. I only utilize basically 3. I don't know, it might be, I'm not sure exactly how many there are, but there are several different guidelines that you can apply to your classroom setting. Is basically for any type of course that you teach. The whole point of the UDL guidelines is to just to remove those barriers, those teaching barriers, where a class is learning a particular skill, a particular item, or a particular product, and you don't want them to sit there and look at you. It's best to remove those barriers and have them participate. So how do you want them to participate? You can use various models, objects. You can use your open discussion, online discussion. So you try to get your students involved. So that's what the UDL guidelines is based on. It's based on removing teaching barriers in several different ways. And I do have a reference there. As soon as you go onto this particular website, it's called udlguidelines.cas.org. Immediately, you just kind of fall in love with the tool because it says, oh, wow, I could be teaching that particular item this way. And I've been teaching it this way for so long. And then sometimes you wonder why the student over in the corner is falling asleep or looking up at the sky or on their cell phone. It's because they're not involved. So that's the whole point of UDL guidelines. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Yvette. I just want to say hello. I'm Amy Bohorquez. I was
Amy.
in the panel. Hello, sorry, it took me a second to get in here. You can see I'm actually at work. We have some face-to-face stuff, but I put the link to the UDL guidelines in the chat. So everyone has it now, but yeah. And then I believe, Peter, you were going to go next, correct?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Yvette. That's wonderful. I will check out CAST a little bit more. And I notice a couple of my colleagues from PCC, Portland Community College, are here today. Jennifer Lucas, who I think knows a lot about CAST because she works with accessibility for our online courses.
Okay.
And Monica Marlowe is here also. She's multimedia wizard who knows all kinds of things about graphics and design and multimedia and does amazing things with online courses and tools. And she's waving in the chat right there, I see. So I wanted to spend about 3 minutes just telling you all a little bit about our journey at Portland Community College within online learning to learn more about culturally responsive teaching, or what we call culturally responsive online teaching. And I'm going to share my screen here in a second. Let me see if I can just get to the right place. Okay, this is and this is very, very boring. My my screen share that I'm about to do here, but I'm going to do it anyway, just because it gives us a little, it gives us something to look at. A couple of things I was hoping to look at here. So we use this acronym CROT. C-R-O-T stands for culturally responsive online teaching. There's quite a lot out there in the literature about culturally responsive teaching, but not a lot about online teaching. So that's something that we really wanted to investigate. And then something that's peculiar about our journey is that I'm just talking really about our journey within online learning, because this morning during the keynote that Peralta did, which was excellent, and their panel, they talked, I think, about more of their institutional journey with equity. But I'm just really talking specifically about what some of the things that we did within online learning. So if you work within online learning, or if you teach online courses, maybe this could be somewhat relevant to what you're doing. So in the first year of our little journey, and our journey has been about 3 years so far, we started something called an inquiry group. And really what we wanted to do is we wanted to just gather some people together from online learning and also instructors who are teaching online and just ask the question, what is this thing called equity in online teaching? What is this thing called culturally responsive teaching? And so really we just spent a year in a small group of about 10 to 15 people looking for interesting information and resources having to do with this topic. And so one of the things we did, and I'm going to click over here into our LMS for a second so you can see D2L and how beautiful it is. But we created a course shell within D2L called Culturally Responsive Online Teaching. And I won't share a ton of this with you because there's a lot in here. But basically, we wanted just to share resources and we wanted to discuss issues and work asynchronously. And so obviously discussions in an LMS work really well for that. The other thing I'd recommend for this, if you're going to use something like the LMS or you're going to use an inquiry group to try to find out a lot about the topic, get a librarian involved in your group. So we have an amazing librarian at PCC named Max Macias, who's a big leader in this area. And librarians are able to find the most amazing resources. And so Max found all kinds of great things. I'm going to click on content here for a second and just click into a few of the things that we found. There's some great things. We found reading lists from other institutions. We found articles. We found, of course, we found the Peralta materials. Those come right up. The Peralta Online Equity Rubric, which is really big and really did a lot to help us in our journey. So anyway, that's kind of a little bit about year one. Year one was all about inquiry. So then in year two, we wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the topics. So we formed two groups. Again, this is just within online learning, online instructors for the most part, but also some others who are interested in equity, interested in the topic. But we formed two groups, an entry-level group that we called the exploratory group. And then we formed a group, we didn't want to call them advanced because we thought that might be intimidating. So we called it the beyond exploratory group. That was Heather's idea. Heather Guevara, she's our dean now of online learning and is a sociologist and knows a lot about how people think about things. And so this is very helpful. And then I'm just going to hold up this book here. This is something that some of you have probably seen before. This is Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, Zaretta Hammond's book now, which is, I think, getting really famous in this field. Zaretta Hammond is down in the Bay Area, I think maybe kind of near Peralta. And so what we did is we spent a year with the exploratory group, just sort of reading through this book and exploring what's in it and talking about what's in it. And then the Beyond Exploratory group really dove deeply into the chapters of the book. And for example, on page 99 of this book, there's this great warm demander chart. I don't know if you can see this, but if you don't have this book, I recommend you run out and get it or get the ebook. It's maybe available through your library. A lot of them are, a lot of libraries have ebooks now. There's a good ebook version of this. So we spent a year diving into this book and it was really great. By the way, I'm going to do a little plug here. I don't know if Kevin is still here, but this is a new book that I just bought. I'm very excited about this book. Advancing on, maybe Kevin will, if he's here, he'll like put applaud. Oh, Amy's applauding me. I appreciate that. Yeah. But this is Kevin's book.
Yeah, and he left, but I'll tell him that.
Okay, thanks, Amy. So I'm really excited to dig into this book. I just got it like a week ago, and it's so exciting. Pages 74 and 75, all these terrific charts that I get to dive into. 3 examples of mapping activities to learning outcomes requiring different levels of thinking, right? This is great stuff. Okay, so that was our second year. And then our third year, and actually Kevin kind of comes in here again. Everything kind of went haywire at the beginning of 2020, as it probably did for a lot of you because of the pandemic. And we were all going crazy and just trying to, teach our courses and figure out what we were doing. But one thing that we're doing this year, which is really exciting, and we're able to do because we got some CARES funding, and I think some of you, maybe some of your institutions also got CARES funding to support online learning, we're getting some expert assistance. And one of the places we're going to is something called the @ONE Network, which is in California. And if some of you are in California, you know about the @ONE network. They have some wonderful courses. There's one specifically about equity in online teaching. And we were also able to get a little bit of money for consulting. And so we've got a couple consultants, and one of the consultants happens to be Kevin Kelly. And so, and that was one great thing that we did. We were able to meet with Didem and Inger and Chelsea and Kevin, actually from Peralta, and they gave us some great suggestions. So reaching out to some of our colleagues in the field, and actually this conference didn't exist when we started doing this either, so this is another great resource. So really talking to your colleagues about what they're doing is so helpful. And then finally, I'm just going to go to this little last slide here, which it says year 4 is coming up, right? 2021, 22 is the academic year. We'll be here soon. So I'd just like to ask any of you if you have any ideas about things you think that we could do in our journey that would help us to advance equity in our online courses. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and throw the floor open. And if any of you have any great ideas, I'd love to hear them. And I see there's chat, which I wasn't following.
Oh, I just put some of the links in for one Zaretta Hammond's book, but also the podcast that Kevin has about his book and in the chat. So people have the links. Yeah, and I would recommend, if you have any CARES money left, or if you have maybe a department budget to buy, what we did was we bought a number of copies of Zaretta Hammond's book as a department, and like we kind of had a book club of sorts, so that folks could read it. And then we've lent it out to other departments. So we've started to build a bit of a lending library in our department. I'm in biology, if you don't remember from this morning. You can tell this is a lab, right? So we started to do that, and lending it particularly like to our math folks are actually very equity minded. So there's been a lot of kind of going back and forth. One of the things I was thinking as you were talking, Peter, and I'm just gonna, I think I have like my email closed. I'm gonna share my screen real fast
Sure.
to show you what we did in our department. So here's obviously Canvas, right? Let me move the bar. Okay. What we did was we in our department built a DE resources shell, like it's like a sandbox of sorts in Canvas, and then by class put in the examples that we were using. So for instance, I teach the majors biology as well as non-majors biology. So, well, and I know now there's some recommendations not to use charts for accessibility issues, but so I apologize.
Yeah, it's always a journey, isn't it, to figure out what you're doing?
Especially us science people, like we like charts and boxes and yeah.
Yeah, we love charts.
And some of it too, I have to say, like I use the chart a lot and sharing slides with students because it keeps the alignment and on their phone or on other platforms. So I got to cost benefit. I think I have to do a little bit of analysis on that one. Yeah. But yeah, so what we did was did it by class, and then see what you can see is each class kind of has its own like module equivalent. And then we put in some of the activities that we do in the classes. So then anyone in our department can go in here and find stuff, and chemistry is actually interested. So we've added some chem folks into our Canvas shell. So I can show you mine, and let me make sure this is the right one. Oh, of course it's not. Okay, my Meet Your Colleagues now. I do community agreements in my classes. So we agree, or let me see if this one has it. Of course it doesn't. Okay, I'm going to show you my actual class. It doesn't have student names. The SFRPA thing. I'm like, okay, wait, let me figure this out. Okay, there's a way I can do this. Okay, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to close this down. What we did was, so my students, again, we have community agreements in the beginning. So their first discussion, the people in class, is a discussion of community agreements and the application of these agreements in the classroom. Like, what does it mean online versus face-to-face? And so other colleagues were interested in it. So we made this Canvas shell so that people can just take what they want, So, and that's one of the things in Zaretta Hammond's book. She talks a lot about collectivist behaviors versus individualist behaviors, right? And as I mentioned this morning, yeah, my department, we run by consensus. We don't have a chair. Well, our administration thinks that we're all just chairs sure. But we don't have, like, we're trying to really kind of model a non-hierarchical system, which is hard for biologists because we think of things hierarchical, right? Right. So, but trying to kind of do that amongst ourselves. And one of the things that ended up happening from that process was other colleagues of mine were like, oh, that's what I'm doing in the room. You know, it's like, oh, right. Yeah. Like, we need to get more of our students talking, but they're so used to, especially like for us, the lecture kind of based thing. So running our department meetings differently kind of ended up infusing itself into classrooms, which was also kind of cool to see over time. Yeah,
that's neat, Amy. Let's see. One thing I always hear from science instructors, because I work in online learning and I work with lots of different instructors, they say, the online instructors say, I don't have anything to talk about. We don't have anything to talk about in our class, you know, except for the science, except for the biology, the chemistry, you know, the physics, whatever the science is. But you seem to be saying there's a lot of other stuff you can talk about.
Yeah, and one of the things, and I just to point out too, in the schedule for today, there's Padlets where we can also have questions, and I'll look at some of them before Friday, but I am doing a talk on Friday morning about STEM, relevance in STEM, because one of our rubric lines is relevance, and that's right. Often, well, either science folks say, well, it's all relevant, right? It's like, yes, that's true, but how do we make it seem more accessible is a word, I think, or inviting and welcoming. And there was just a study done that you might have seen that got some coverage in the New York Times about students in STEM are more likely to be successful based on the community they build in class, not on the mastery of the knowledge. And so that's one place that all of us STEM folks can do a much better job, right? So trying to build community in the room. And it makes sense when you think about like, oh yeah, if I'm struggling and I don't feel comfortable with where I am, I'm not going to ask for help. I'm not going to ask my colleagues, you know, I'm not going to take the next level of class. But if I can see myself in the material, if I can, you know, make friends in the lab or whatever, or on the online environment, I'm much more likely to continue. So what we end up talking about a lot is not so much course specific material, but how to build an environment in the room, whether it's digital or not, that is a welcoming space, right? And one of the things that ends up happening, I think, in like biology in particular, we end up talking about a lot of topics that are not particularly positive, like climate change or institutionalized racism in medicine, or you know, even just discussing this and the vaccine and people's very real and likely concerns about a government vaccine. Like it's not totally kooky to be wary of this, right? Like, yes. So let's talk about it. And a lot of folks in science don't feel comfortable teacher-wise, like talking about these things. So trying to figure out ways that we can have these conversations. We're using Padlet in this conference, but I just make a Canvas page that's editable to everyone. And they post there, and they can post anonymously then. So people have concerns about what we're talking about. And I think some of my students have said they don't post, but just the fact that it's there makes them feel like I do care what they think. I think Cheryl said something about that this morning too, right? Like students go, oh, you're not a machine. Like, yeah. I mean, I am, but at a cellular level, right? Yeah. So yeah, it's been an interesting thing, and it's interesting to talk to folks, you know, like I said, in other departments or in my division, math and science division, or the CTE divisions, like, you know, because we have a lot of similarities of like, well, I don't know they're not writing a reflection paper about how to use this machine. I was like, maybe they should.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and you know, when you're talking about all the topics in science, I never would have thought, you know, because I'd never lived through a pandemic before, that disease could be politicized.
Yeah.
I had no idea that could happen.
Right.
I mean, it's so amazing now. I mean, I live in Oregon, and you know, we're a pretty oh, I don't know. We're a state with a rural urban divide, as many places have.
Right.
And but you hear the rhetoric from the rural parts of the state about how, the disease is a hoax, the disease is whatever. And it's like, well, anyway,
Yeah.
so there's certainly a lot to discuss, right? I mean, and
Yeah.
science is really at the heart of all of it.
Yeah, and I think, like, as I kind of alluded to this morning, a lot of folks in science think that we're not biased because, that's the way it's taught or presented in the media or whatever. But of course there are, and we can reflect back on what could have been handled differently, things like that. And one of the other things I just wanted to mention too, like one of the things I'll talk about on Friday also is, Claude Steele's work with stereotype threat. Right. And ensuring that our students who may not see themselves in the material, we're acknowledging, not pointing it out in class, like that's a whole other thing. Or like I had one in the beginning, a lot of us, we put stuff in our Canvas or in our class without an outlet for students to share their expression of the horror, like what we're covering. And if you have to be aware of it though, right? And that's just it. So talking to students, like my tests, I got this from a math teacher. I just call them, tell me what you've learned. Like, I don't call them a test anymore. And the first question is, what's something positive that somebody said to you in the last, recently, and that could be in the last month or whatever. Or what's something that made you happy, that's the first question, not, I promise not to cheat, but just let's do this. And since they're my science students, I always put a reference, like, here's the reference of why I'm asking you about this.
Now, Amy, do you have projects? Do you have projects? Because you can go projects forever in science, and I understand that I don't think I would do exams either. I would probably have them do projects where they can build and add in all their knowledge that they have learned into a project.
Totally.
Yeah, so I'm sure you do projects. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things that we started to do, because what comes up, because I absolutely agree with you. And a lot of our folks, it's like, oh, but when they transfer, they're going to have to take exams. They're going to have to take practical exams, which are really stressful and uncomfortable, and nobody does well on them, or they're going to have to take boards. So how do we do both? Like, how do we, one, prepare students to have to do these standardized tests that we know are no good, right? As well as, right. So, but I think Cheryl said something about this too, about the point breakdown, so, and my tests they are timed, but they're open, but they're very reflective questions. And I keep telling them, like, I'm trying to teach you how to study this so you can take a test on it. I'm not expecting you remember everything, and again, I think, yeah, some of it's that talking with students about why I'm doing stuff. Then they're like, oh, because that seems silly. I'm like, yes, I know you think it seems silly, but there's a reason we're doing it. So,
Can I ask both of you, Yvette and Amy, because you're both you're both teaching in the classroom, you're teaching online and in the classroom. What got you really interested in equity in your online classes? Like, what was it that sort of made you think this is important and I need to do something about this? And maybe Yvette, you could go first.
Yeah.
Okay. Basically, I think, and when actually when I came into this particular element here, I was basically going to teach on removing teaching barriers. And then I went back and looked at the title. I said, oh, this is supposed to be about equity. So I had to change my topic to include equity. And I was thinking, okay, how am I gonna do that? Then I started thinking about the classroom. And one of my main things is I learned, and I've been knowing for a long time, that students learn differently. So it's so important to have an equal way of learning. So you need to be able to learn this way, be able to learn it online, be able to use the cell phone, because some assignments can get done by a cell phone or tablet. And one thing too that happens often, a lot of times, especially in the online environment, students don't have all the I would say all the equipment they need. That's one thing we learned through this pandemic, is how tough students were having a hard time with not having the equipment. So you needed to make a way where students could use their tablet or students could use a Chromebook versus a laptop, even though the Chromebook may not have as much as a regular laptop. So you had to make your environment, your teaching environment, available and make it more equal, I'll put it that way, where they can learn this particular item. They can learn it on their tablet, they can learn it on the Chromebook, they can learn it on their laptop. So that's kind of how I thought that the equity learning was very, very important. You must have different platforms.
And Yvette, would you say that the pandemic teaching, when the pandemic started, kind of kicked that all off for you, or was it something like that happened maybe before that, or just incidental?
Actually, before the pandemic, I was just starting the Universal Design for Learning training. We had started in a classroom. It's like a whole year where we meet like once a month, and we have these major projects and workshops. And our first workshop was on campus because that was around January. And then March, the pandemic hit, and everything else was online from that point. So actually, once I took the Universal Design for Learning training, that's kind of kicked my mind into a different direction of how do you want to portray this information to your students in a different way where they can get involved and participate and so forth.
Yes, thank you. That's great. You just made me think that Jennifer Lucas is here today from PCC, and she is a professional in the online accessibility area. And I think sometimes one thing that's challenging at my institution, where we have people like Jennifer and a bunch of other people too, is that sometimes I think sometimes I want to outsource that to those people. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, we'll make sure, like people like Jennifer, we'll make sure that everything is accessible, but it really is more than that, right? It really is incumbent on all of us to be thinking about how we're doing these things.
I'd say too that some of the things that come up with like with using our equity rubric and doing course evaluations with other people is that when you make the class more equitable, often it ends up more accessible as well, because you are coming up with different ways to turn in an assignment, or that might be right. Like a lot of the reality of how many students are doing all this work on their phones is kind of like, overwhelming. And there's things that Canvas doesn't look the same, like pull down multiple matching, like it doesn't come up the same, right?
Right.
Yeah. So making sure there's an option, and then in the process, you end up kind of not fixing. It's just making it more welcoming to everyone.
Yeah, but one of the things that we talked about in our inquiry group was the idea that not everybody has to take the same path to reach the same destination. And that's really a powerful idea. But it's more work though, isn't it? Like if you're going to design your class and you're going to say, okay, well, you don't just have to write a paper. You could also do a video, or you could, I guess an audio file sometimes is a little limited because it's just the audio, but or you could do a narrated PowerPoint or something like that. But I have to say that it wasn't, for me personally, it wasn't until I was in grad school doing a master's degree at a school of education that I found my very first professor who did that. His name is Mike Melenda. I still remember his name. He's an amazing guy, and he's retired now, I think. But he did that in our class. He said, okay, if you learn better by making a video, make a video. If you learn better by writing a paper, write a paper. If you learn better in groups, I want you to get into a group, and then but if you want to work on your own, that's okay too. So that was really eye-opening to me to see how that worked, because I thought it really brought out the best in everybody to be able to bring forth their best. But it's such a hard thing to do. I know I'm guilty in my own classes that I teach that, I would like to do more of that. And sometimes it's just hard to, come up with all those different formats for people.
One of our math folks and I'll mention this on Friday too, but we're lucky to be close to Cal State East Bay, and their math department is moving towards what was previously referred to as mastery grading, but now it's called proficiency grading or goal grading, which is better terms. But one of our math teachers was trying it out, and she was showing us kind of how her class is set up. And it's a really amazing idea, you know, that you pick these, say, 20 things. This is what you really need to get out of. And then this happens a lot in the sciences. I'll talk about somebody's work who kind of moved the same direction. But the amount of work that Kathy is doing to ensure everyone's got multiple chances to, you know, show them the proficiency of the goal and the different kind of activities and all that, like the way that we're unfortunately pressured to fill what, you know, FTES and like our full-time equivalent students and productivity and all this other nonsense ends up with us having these large classes. Like my lecture's got 60 people in it. Like it's not feasible for me to do and be a sane and healthy person. So trying to figure out ways to balance some of these things out, I think is a big part of the process, you know, because it's got to be something you can do as well as makes it hard.
Yeah. It's got to be feasible. Yeah. Well, was there anybody else that in our group today who was doing a poster?
It's just the three of us. There was one other poster listed, but they're not here. So, and like I said, my poster is the same as my presentation on Friday. So, and like I said, it's just about what I've mentioned, like relevancy in STEM. I will tell you a funny story though about how I got in this group was my department, like I said, we had, you know, kind of studied some of Zaretta Hammond's work and Bell Hook's work and a number of other Adrienne Marie Brown's work. And I took a class, like one of our online classes, and I didn't think they were representing that work the way that they should have, I guess you could say. And Ingrid and I are very good friends, and I was kind of complaining to her. So she's like, well, why don't you just join the committee then? And I was like, oh, wait, no, I just took on something else. Like, okay, but it's been really great. Like, it's been fun to also, we end up too siloed, right? So our STEM equity group, like Maria is in art, and like I said, Doug is in a counselor, and Cheryl is in nutrition. So we get a lot of perspectives in our discussions, which has been really beneficial. But yeah, an old colleague used to say the reward for good work is more work. And, and I think that yeah, sometimes, but this I feel like is way more worthwhile than some of the other committees that I've been on. So I feel like it's a plus.
Yeah, and
I
Amy,
appreciate I'm sorry. I appreciate Amy, you sharing your Blackboard shell. Well, actually you're using Canvas, right?
Canvas, yeah.
So I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, I think we're all used to the different levels and layers that you can go with these programs. And actually our college is in the process of moving to Canvas.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, it's that, and I think that like what we were talking about this pandemic, because I never thought I would teach online. Like I thought maybe when I retire, you know, like maybe I never thought how I could teach biology online, and this kind of forcing us into it, at least. And in my department, I think really got us, I can say a number of us took this as the opportunity to really evaluate how we were teaching stuff. So as difficult as it's been, has tried to get something good, you know, out of the process. And Canvas and the way Canvas works is one of those things that was like, okay. And we had used Moodle before, if you remember that. So
love Moodle.
Yeah, right. And so moving to Canvas was like, oh, that didn't work. And luckily one of my classes, we'd always used Canvas as support, you know, kind of the whole time. So we had some materials, but that was very different than teaching and that was a big, like, Canvas as support versus Canvas as the platform for the class. Okay.
Yeah, I'm jealous of all of you using Canvas because you have the Canvas Commons where you can share with anybody, or you can, you know, which is so wonderful. We're a D2L school, and D2L doesn't have that same sharing function. Everything's kind of siloed, and I think they do have a way that you can kind of like open up things to be shared, but it's a lot more complicated, and I think it costs extra and all this, and so it's one of those things about
the district next to us, Contra Costa, they use D2L also, I know, and we've had some conversations about that, because like I said, like a lot of people use our rubric or have seen the Peralta rubric, which I didn't put that link into our chat, but I think you've probably seen it by now.
Yeah. Somewhat famous.
You're right. Yeah. But I was like, oh, you can just do the Canvas Commons. And they were like, no, we can't. I'm like, okay, right.
I know all you Canvas schools, you have that going, which is wonderful.
Yeah, it's fascinating too. Yes. Hello. I just saw somebody coming. Hello, welcome. I will say too that now that I've also taken a class via Canvas, like as a student, and seeing what that looks like as a student really also made me reevaluate some of the way I set up my Canvas shell. Was like, oh, like now I get why everyone had that question, because it sometimes looks very different to us, but yeah.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah. Well, are there other questions folks might have for us? I didn't see questions necessarily in the chat, but where you can all, and again, the links to the Padlets are in the schedule for the conference. And I talked on Friday if there's anything you want me to cover. Yeah, sure. And like I said, I mainly focus with my other STEM colleagues how to make your class relevant by making it a welcoming place, and some of the barriers that come up for folks to maintain or to stay in STEM come from how the room feels. So yeah, thank you. But other questions, I'm happy we can keep chatting, or I can
get a break before the next session.
That too, right? Yeah, go get some water, get a snack, stand up, right? We have to move around, get that lymph moving around as we all leave. Yeah, but it's really nice to meet you both.
Nice to meet both of you as well.
Yeah, and everyone, thank you. Thanks for the UDL link too, because sometimes I'm still like, what am I doing again? So I appreciate it.
Yes, and thank you, Amy, for the podcast link to Kevin's. I'm gonna get that right on my phone here and then listen to it as I mow the lawn.
Yes, brilliant. All right, cool. All right. Well, yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.